The trucks appeared without warning. Their engines roared, breaking the silence of the Guanacaste Reserve in Costa Rica. One after the other, they drove deeper into the protected area. And as their tailgates opened, tons of bright orange pulp spilled onto the ground. The air was filled with a strong citrus scent. It was a very unusual load and an even more unusual mission. Native birds flew curiously overhead, and wild animals peeked cautiously from behind the trees. But amid this chaos, two ecologists watched the scene with great anticipation. For them, this wasn't the destruction of nature. This was the beginning of a bold experiment that could either bring a dying ecosystem back to life or become a catastrophe for the protected land. Daniel Jansen and Winnie Holwachs were no ordinary scientists. The ecologist couple from the University of Pennsylvania had spent years studying Costa Rica's unique biodiversity. They loved this land. Though small in size, Costa Rica is home to about 6% of the world's total biodiversity. Jansen and Holwachs were determined to protect this natural treasure. They met while studying at Princeton and graduated in 1976. Since then, they had not only shared their lives, but also combined their strengths in science and dedicated themselves to the study and protection of tropical rainforests. For many years, they worked as researchers and conservation advisors in the Guanacaste Reserve. During their work, the couple encountered a serious problem. Many areas that were once lush rainforest had been converted into cattle pastures. After decades of intense grazing, these lands had become dry and nearly lifeless. The grass was coarse and sparse, and the soil was worn and compacted. The natural diversity of plants and animals had vanished, and the once rich land had turned into an ecological desert. Restoring these areas became a lifelong mission for Jansen and Holwachs. They knew that the damaged pastures would remain barren for decades, maybe even centuries, without human intervention. Nature urgently needed help to repair the damage caused by careless human activity. In 1997, the scientists were given an unexpected opportunity. A company named Del Oro had built an orange juice factory near the edge of the reserve. Most activists and environmentalists were concerned industrial operations often cause pollution and place additional stress on the environment. But Jansen and Holwachs saw the situation differently. They discovered that Del Oro had a major waste problem. Only the juicy part of the oranges was used to make juice, while the peels, seeds, and fibrous pulp became waste. For a large company like Del Oro, this meant tons of organic waste every day. Getting rid of that waste cost the company a lot of money. Several options were considered: landfilling, burning, or composting. But all of these methods were either expensive, environmentally harmful, or both. That's when the ecologists came up with a bold idea. What if this organic waste could be used to restore the damaged parts of the reserve? Orange peels are rich in organic matter, and as they decompose, they can enrich poor soils. A perfect win-win situation. The company gets rid of its waste, and the reserve receives a natural fertilizer that supports the recovery of its ecosystems. The idea sounded crazy. Many environmentalists and activists were shocked by the thought of dumping industrial waste in a nature reserve, but Jansen and Holwachs believed in their theory and were ready to take the risk. They made Del Oro an unusual offer. The company would donate part of its land adjacent to the reserve for state protection, and in return it would be allowed to deposit orange waste in specific areas of the reserve exactly on those damaged pastures that needed to be revived. For the company, it was a profitable deal. They gained a free way to dispose of their waste and improved their image as an environmentally conscious business. For the reserve, the benefits were clear. The protected area would expand, and there was a chance to bring damaged land back to life. But to implement this bold plan, they needed government approval. After long discussions and careful assessment of potential risks, the project was approved, but under strict conditions. Del Oro was only allowed to deposit natural agricultural waste orange peels and pulp without any chemical additives. Before transport to the reserve, the peels had to be treated to remove lamina, natural substance that can inhibit plant growth. And most importantly, the waste could only be spread on specific plots of land that had previously served as cattle pastures and had already lost all biological diversity. In 1998, the plan was put into action. Del Oro began delivering orange waste to the reserve. The scale of the project was impressive. The company planned to deliver about 12,000 tons of orange peels each year. Around 1,000 truckloads were needed. Over time, it could amount to as much as 250,000 tons of organic waste, enough to cover an entire football stadium with a thick layer. The first few months of the experiment were not very pleasant from an aesthetic point of view. Bright orange mountains of peels covered 3 hectares of land and looked like something from another planet. The strong citrus smell was noticeable from far away. Local residents and tourists were unhappy with the sight and smell of this strange garbage dump in the nature reserve. But within just 6 months, the orange mass began to noticeably decompose, transforming into rich, dark compost. The smell gradually faded, and the first brave plants started to grow through the layer of rotting material. Jansen and Holwachs carefully documented the entire process. They placed yellow markers to outline the test site's boundaries, regularly took soil samples, and tracked all changes in soil health and plant life. It seemed like the experiment was working as planned. But then, an unexpected force stood in their way: human rivalry and jealousy. Another juice company, Tikafruit, operating in the same region, was very unhappy with the agreement between Del Oro and the reserve. Tikafruit had already spent a lot of money developing its own waste processing systems, and the idea that a competitor could dispose of its waste for free felt like an unfair advantage. Tikafruit launched a large-scale campaign against the experiment. The company ran alarming ads in newspapers and on TV, portraying the orange waste as mountains of rotting garbage that spread disease and attracted pests. They claimed the project would lure fruit flies that could damage local crops, and that the foul smell of decaying mass was causing headaches and nausea among residents. Although there was no scientific evidence to support these claims, the negative publicity worked. Public opinion quickly turned against the project. Local farmers began to worry about their harvests, and tourism operators feared the reserve would lose its appeal to visitors. Eventually, Tikafruit filed a lawsuit in a Costa Rican court, claiming the project violated environmental laws and created a dangerous precedent that could lead to uncontrolled waste dumping in protected areas. Jansen and Hallwalks, along with representatives from the Guanacaste Reserve and Del Oro, defended the project vigorously. They brought in scientists to explain the potential ecological benefits of the experiment. The respected Rainforest Alliance publicly confirmed that the project was safe for the environment. Del Oro proved that it was complying with all regulations and restrictions. But the case took a political turn, and in 1999, just a year after the experiment began, Costa Rica Supreme Court ordered the project to be stopped immediately. The judges acknowledged that the experiment might be environmentally beneficial, but it set a dangerous precedent that other companies could exploit to justify dumping various types of waste in protected areas. When the project was shut down, about 12,000 tons of orange peels had been dumped at the test site, roughly the weight of 2,000 full-grown African elephants. The peels covered an area the size of 3 soccer fields with a layer several dozen centimeters thick. The ecologists had to abandon the experiment and leave the site as it was. No more orange peels, no more human intervention. Nature had to deal with what had already been done. After the court's decision, interest in the experiment quickly faded. Soon, only a few scientists and reserve staff even remembered it. The area where the experiment had taken place was rarely visited or studied. The years passed, and the world changed. The problems of climate change and biodiversity loss became more urgent. Scientists around the globe began searching for effective ways to restore damaged ecosystems and combat greenhouse gas effects. In 2013, nearly 15 years after the project ended, a young researcher from Princeton University named Timothy Truer heard about the forgotten experiment in a conversation with Professor Jen. Truer was fascinated by the story: what had become of the place where tons of orange peels had been dumped. Had the experiment turned into the ecological failure critics had predicted, or had nature found a way to make use of the waste? Truer decided to check the results for himself. In 2014, he organized an expedition to Costa Rica to find the site and see what it looked like 16 years after the experiment began. The search was not easy. The landscape of the reserve had changed significantly over the past 1.5 decades. Using old maps and GPS coordinates, the research team spent several days trying to locate the test site. When they finally arrived at the area they believed to be the right spot, they made a surprising discovery. Instead of a barren, lifeless field, instead of a patch of land covered in rotting orange peels, they found a dense, lush forest. At first, the researchers thought they had made a mistake. The transformation was so dramatic. They kept searching and pushed their way through the thick vegetation. Only when one team member spotted a flash of yellow in the distance, the remnants of one of the markers Jansen and Hallwalks had placed at the beginning of the experiment, did, they realized they were indeed in the right place. The marker was nearly completely covered by plants, and there was no trace of the orange peels. Instead, they saw an impressive variety of trees, shrubs, and vines. The lush vegetation created a cool shade beneath which a thriving understory of ferns and flowering plants had taken root. But to fully understand the transformation, the researchers needed more than just visual impressions. They needed hard scientific data. They began a detailed analysis and measurement process. Truer and his team compared soil samples taken at the beginning of the experiment with current conditions. They set up measurement stations, counted and measured every tree, and identified the plant species. For an objective comparison, they also studied a control site on the opposite side of the roadland with a similar history of use, but without any orange peels added. The results astonished. The site where the orange waste had been deposited differed completely from the control site. The soil was far richer in nutrients. Tree biomass had increased by 176% compared to the untreated site. On the experimental plot, the team found 24 different tree species, while the control site had only 8. Among the trees was a massive fig tree so thick that 3 adults had to join hands to encircle its trunk. The tree canopies had grown together, forming a dense green roof that blocked out the sun and created conditions typical of a mature tropical forest. In this restored forest, the researchers observed animals that are normally not found in open pastures, including a tyra, a large forest-dwelling weasel that needs a healthy forest to survive. The difference between the test and control area was so stark, it could even be seen from the air. A bright green patch surrounded by sun-scorched pastures. The researchers took detailed notes of their observations, analyzed the soil composition, and documented all plant and animal species found. The results were published in a scientific journal and created a stir in the environmental science community. The conclusions were clear. The orange peel experiment was a phenomenal success. In just 16 years, a degraded pasture had turned into a flourishing tropical forest, rich in biodiversity. The orange waste not only enriched the soil with vital nutrients like nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus, but also helped suppress the growth of invasive grasses that normally block forest recovery. For Jansen and Holwachs, this was proof of their theory. Even though the project had been cut short, it achieved remarkable results. Their creative thinking turned an industrial waste problem into a solution for restoring damaged ecosystems. Most importantly, this restoration method was nearly cost-free. Normally, forest restoration requires significant investment in purchasing, manual planting, and fertilizer application. With the orange peels, the only cost was transporting the waste, something the company already had to do anyway. The Costa Rica experiment inspired scientists around the world to explore new ways to use organic waste to restore natural ecosystems. Studies began on converting orange peels into biofuel and biodegradable plastics. Food companies started researching how to turn their waste into a resource for environmental recovery. Of course, this method is not universal. The warm, humid climate in Costa Rica helped the organic matter decompose quickly and promoted plant growth. In other climates, the process might be slower or less effective. Also, any addition of organic waste to natural ecosystems must be done with great care, under scientific supervision, and in consideration of local environmental conditions. Still, the story of the orange peel forest in Costa Rica remains an inspiring example of how creative solutions to environmental problems can lead to surprising and amazing outcomes. It shows that sometimes the waste of one system can become a valuable resource for another, and that nature has an incredible ability to heal if we give it the chance and the right support. From mountains of orange peels to a lush tropical forest, the transformation took just 16 years. In ecological time, that's the blink of an eye. For us, it's a lesson. Sometimes, the boldest and most unconventional ideas lead to the most impressive results. Next time you peel an orange, you might see the rind differently. Maybe it's not waste at all. Maybe it's the beginning of a new forest.